the second topic for the structures of globalization, which is market integration. First thing is the definition for market integration, which is a process which refers to the expansion of firms by consolidating additional market functions and activities under a single management. With that, we have here occurrences of market integration, or when can we consider na ang isang market or merong nag-e-exist na market integration dun sa ginagalawan natin na markets. So market integration show how easily two or more markets can trade with each other, and it occurs when prices in different places or for potential items follow similar trends over time. It occurs when prices often move in proportion to one another and when this relationship is very evident among distinct markets. It occurs when a market of goods and services experiences identical patterns of price increases or decreases. So you can see na kapag ang isang market ay integrated or fully integrated, once na magkaroon ng change sa price ng isang commodity, makaka-apekto ito sa presyo ng another commodity. For example, right now, alam natin na tumataas yung presyo ng petroleum. So one way or another, magkakaroon din ng pagtaas ng presyo para dun sa mga commodity na kinakailangan ng petroleum para i-transport yung kanilang commodity or i-provide yung service nila. Dahil integrated ang service na yon with the petroleum industry. It occurs when there are exerting impacts that cause similar changes or shifts in other markets that focus on linked commodities or events occurring inside two or more markets. It says that kapag merong impacts or exerting impacts, that means na nagbabago yung SRP or yung presyo ng isang commodity, and at the same time, yung pagbabago na yun or yung impact which was exerted to that particular market will also affect another market. Dito pumapasok yung tinatawag natin na spillover effect, wherein yung change sa economy ng isang bansa or ng isang industry will also affect another industry. So market forces are thought to be working well if markets are highly integrated, which means prices changes in one location are regularly related to price changes in other locations, and market agents are able to communicate between markets. When there is high integration, that means na meron tayong low barriers or low trade barriers. Mababa yung tax, mababa yung tariff, additional taxes or charges na tinatawag natin. And it will have the result na ang prices are similar in two markets. Halimbawa, foreign and local market. Kung mababa ang trade barrier, that means na ang magiging presyo ng commodity from foreign market will be just the same with the local market. Kasi there will no be result kaya magtataas sila ng presyo dahil mababa naman yung trade nila or mababa yung tax na binibigay sa nila. In low integration naman, merong high barriers to trade o mataas yung tax, mataas yung trade, yung tariff, taxes. Prices fluctuate between the two markets. Dahil pagtaas ng costing ng isang commodity, pagtaas din ng presyo nito. So in simple terms, yung SRP ng isang commodity na related to other commodity or kinakailangan para sa completion ng other commodity will affect that commodity if they are highly integrated. So to reduce barriers and ease market integration, foreign trade or the mutual exchange of goods and services between international regions and borders is a huge help. Dito ngayon papasok ang free trade system. Once again, in the free trade system, we do have this freedom to import and export commodities in a lower tariff. As international trade grows, the prices will fall until it reaches the price in the original market where the deal was made. It will be possible pag mababa ang tariff, kapag mababa ang costing, kapag mababa ang production, kapag mababa ang pag-transport ng commodity from one point to another. So once again, high integration, mababa yung tax, for example, kaya kayang i-match ni foreign market, ni foreign commodity, ang presyo ng commodity sa local market. Low integration, mataas, for example, ang binabayaran na tax, kaya magkaiba yung nagiging presyo ng local and foreign commodity. Next, with regards to market integration, it can be horizontal, vertical, or conglomeration. When we say horizontal integration, a firm or agency gain control of other firms or agencies that perform similar marketing functions at the same level in the marketing sequence. It is done to reduce cost and marketing competition. So that means nasa same line sila or nasa same field ng production yung ino-offer na service ng dalawang firm na i-combine under single management. Doon mangyayari ang horizontal integration. For example, in 2012, Facebook acquired Instagram for around $1 billion. So out of that $1 billion, they were able to have the management over sa Instagram, and then we can consider ito na horizontal integration since na parehas itong social media platform, parehas itong photo sharing service ang ino-offer. Facebook, looking to strengthen its position in the social media and social sharing space, saw the acquisition of Instagram as an opportunity to grow its market share, increase its product line, reduce competition, and access potential new markets. Vertical integration naman happens when a firm performs more than one activity in the sequence of the marketing process. It can be forward or backward integration. Forward integration happens when the firm takes activities close to the consumption function, just like from supplier magiging retailer. For example, kayo ay yung dating magsasaka, ang ginagawa, binibenta na lamang sa mga nagtitinda ng bigas yung kanilang inaani. Pero if you're going to apply forward integration, maggagawa siya ng sarili niyang store kung saan niya ibebenta yung kanyang mga naani na bigas. Backward integration naman will be the combination of sources and supply. This is from retailer to supplier. So, balik tayo dun sa nagbibigas. Ito naman ay from nagtitinda ka ng bigas or may stall ka ng bigas, you will now acquire a land para i-develop and eventually mag-produce na din ng bigas na ibebenta mo para sa ibang stall. So, from retailer, you now become the supplier. Forward integration ang tawag natin sa vertical integration na letter A kasi you are moving closer to consumption function or to the consumer. Backward integration naman ang tawag natin sa letter B kasi we are moving backwards from the consumption function. We are into the supplier naman. Conglomeration naman will be the combination of activities or agencies not directly related to each other, and then they operate under a unified management. This happens when there are two companies na magko-combine pero magkaiba yung ino-offer nila na products or services. Magkaiba yung line. Halimbawa, yung isa into personal care. Tapos yung isa naman ay into food industry. So once na mag-combine yung dalawa na yun, they can be considered as a conglomerate market integration. For example, meron tayong firm 1 and firm 2 dito. Si firm 1, gas ang tinitinda. Si firm 2 naman ay mga panlinis ng bahay. So we can say na they are in different fields. Kasi yung isa nasa field ng pagkain, tapos yung isa naman nasa field ng mga panlinis. But still, once na i-acquire ni magtitinda yung mga nagtitinda ng bigas, yung pagtitinda na din ng mga panlinis, therefore, we can call it as conglomeration. Kasi different activity ito, yet they were able to acquire both and operate it under a unified management. Another example, si Unilever. Hindi po ba kapag pinag-usapan yung Unilever na brand, ay hindi lang naman ito personal hygiene, hindi lang naman mga pansangkap sa lutuin ang mga ino-offer ni Unilever. It offers a variety of commodities. Kaya mas consider natin na si Unilever do have this conglomeration. Moving to Types of related markets where market integration occurs. It can be stock market integration or financial market integration. So, in stock market integration, similar trading prices for assets tied to specific industry can be found in two or more markets throughout the world because of stock market integration. Stock markets in multiple nations trend in the same direction and show the same predicted risk adjustment returns. While in financial market integration, pumapasok na dito yung loan rates. When we say loan rates, ito yung interest rate na binibigay ng bangko kapag gusto mong manghiram ng pera sa kanila. So when loan rates in many markets start to move in sync, this is known as the financial market integration. And domestic investors can acquire foreign assets, while foreign investors can buy domestic assets in integrated financial markets. So assets with comparable risk should attract the same expected return regardless of location among countries that are fully linked into global financial markets. Next thing ay global corporation. So in the involvement of global corporation, also known as the global company, is coined from the base term global, which means all around the world. When we say global corporation, it is a business that operates in two or more countries. It also goes by the name multinational corporation, transnational corporation, international company, or global company. Ang pinagkaiba-iba lang ng mga terms ito ay yung kanilang place of investment or kung saan nila fino-focus yung kanilang assets. For multinational corporation, meron silang investment in other country, however, they don't have a physical firm. The transnational corporation naman, they can trade with other companies or other countries, yet wala ding physical na firm dun sa ibang country. Si international company naman ay meron ng existence na isang physical firm sa ibang country. Then global company encompasses the three. Next, so historical periods of global corporation. So in early historical periods, as both cities and countries extended their reach beyond their own borders, a form of globalization was initiated, which then followed complex patterns of interactive engagements organized through trade and industry, directly influenced by the emergent and subsequently dominant technologies, especially in shipping and navigation. Dahil sila highly based on trading, kinakailangan nila ng means to transport or to ship out their products and to navigate from country to country with regards to the consumers that they want to reach. So moving to the investment-based globalization. This period was dominated by producer-driven commodity or value chains, which in turn tended to be dominated by the firms characterized by large amounts on concentrated capital, focus on large scale or capital intensive manufacturing or extractive industries. Going back to our history, hindi po ba nagkaroon tayo ng industrial revolution? In industrial revolution, it caused the rise of industry wherein it resulted to the new economic tools like steam engines, manufacturing, and even mass production. With that, nagkaroon ngayon ng edge yung mga companies or yung mga countries na nag-invest sa industrial revolution ito or nag-invest para sa mga economic tools nito. And then, eventually, nagkaroon ng capitalism. Once again, the capitalism is a system wherein all resources and means of production are privately owned. Ang emphasis ng capitalism ay profit maximization and competition as main drivers of their efficiency. Tapos, by 1970 to 1995, nagkaroon tayo ng trade-based globalization. In trade-based globalization, which was due to the emergence of Japan as a major producer nation, especially of automobiles, electronics, and consumers from the 1970s onwards, etong trade-based globalization na nangyari sa Japan ay brought by industrial revolution and capitalism as well. Then, out of that, they were able to produce more products efficiently, and at the same time, they paved the way when it comes to the information revolution. In the information revolution, meron na ngayon tayong inclusion ng technology, which reduced the role of human labor and shifted it from manufacturing-based economy to one that is based on service work and the production of ideas rather than goods. Therefore, computers and other technologies are beginning to replace many jobs offshore the industry. With that being said, it now led to the digital globalization in 1995 onwards. Digital globalization, it has affected the entire structure of how global corporations operate. The integration of corporate structure reducing the effects, the time and distance, especially for services performed within corporate structure, such as design, finance, accounting, and advertising and brand development, legal services, inventory control, etc. Sa papabilis naman ang pag-transfer ng information and idea from one point to another. And as a claim of globalization, everyone will benefit from it in the long run. Para ma-monitor kung ano yung nangyayari sa globalization, para ma-monitor kung ano nangyayari sa isang corporation, meron tinatag na Chief Financial Officer. So itong si Chief Financial Officer ang nagbabalance ng opportunities with the challenges of operating in multiple environments in managing their internal markets and building an advantage. With that, the CFO do have these functions: financing, risk management, and capital budgeting. Financing a group's tax bill can be reduced by the CFO, like borrowing in other countries with high tax rates and lending to operations in countries with lower rates. Para i-balance expenditures and yung profit nila, they will lend operations to countries with lower rates, pero meron pa din silang kikitain out of it. Tapos risk management naman, global firms can offset natural currency exposures through the worldwide operations instead of managing currency exposures through financial markets. Then capital budget naman is getting smarter on valuing investment opportunities. CFOs can add value. So dito, they are balancing kung ano yung mga assets and liabilities sila, and at the same time, ano yung po pwede pang dagdagan ng investment. Technically, ang goal ni Chief Financial Officer ay iwasang mabankrupt ang isang company. Next, foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment is a major driver of global corporate development. It is an investment made by a company or individual in one country in business interest in another country. FDIs can take the form of establishing business operations or acquiring business assets in the other country. For example, pwedeng magtatayo ako ng company sa ibang bansa that is establishing business operation. Kaya naman, makikipag-trade ako sa ibang bansa, makikipag-tie up ako para ako yung magsusupply sa kanila ng isang particular commodity. Pwede din naman na bibili ako ng assets mula dun sa bansa na yon, and that will serve as my investment. So, FDI or foreign direct investment help the developing nations specifically in terms of technology, kasi nadadala natin dito or dinadala sa developing country kung ano man yung technology na kinakailangan for the completion of production. FDI also help the country, the developing country, to gain more investors at magkaroon din ng more employment opportunities para naman sa kanyang mga citizens. So with that pros, meron din namang mga negative side ang FDI. To top it up, we have here the pros and cons of foreign direct investment. Yun nga, sa part ng investor, nagiging diverse yung kanyang portfolio. Kasi, pag madami kang assets, madami kang investments, hindi po ba, you will be trusted by other companies as well na ikaw ay mapagkakatiwalaan, na ikaw ay kayang mag-handle ng business. So, yun ang nangyayari para sa investor. Dahil kaya mo palang mag-handle ng iba't ibang business in different parts of the world or in different regions, therefore, you will be entrusted by other companies then to handle their company or to handle their business kung nasaan kang country. Sunod, it promotes stable long-term lending. Ito naman ay para sa developing country. Kasi hindi po ba ayaw naman ng isang investor na malulugi siya. At kung bababa ang ekonomiya ng isang kumpanya or ekonomiya ng isang bansa, makakaapekto ito sa kanyang negosyo. Therefore, ang magiging resort niya ay pauutangin niya yung nasa bansa na yun para sabay silang aahon or para maiwasan din yung paglubog niya kasabay ng pagbaba ng economy. Next, it provides financing to developing countries sa form ng tax, sa form ng foreign trades, sa form ng trade barriers. Kaya importante na nagbabayad ng tax ang mga investors. Once na may business ka, keep in mind na magbabayad ka talaga ng buwis. And even us, we are paying indirect tax as well whenever we buy something from the store o kaya naman we acquire a service. Kapag nagtrabaho din kayo, magbabayad din kayo ng tax as stated sa ating law. Next ay it provides technology to developing country. Once na ikaw ay mag-invest sa isang country, tapos wala sila nung means of production, ang gagawin mo ay dalhin yung technology na kinakailangan nila dun sa country. It will benefit the citizens in developing country kasi they will be exposed in such form of technology and at the same time, kikita pa sila. Next, ang consumer natin ay not suitable for strategically important industries. Yung mga sinasabi natin strategically important industries ay sa military forces, when it comes to strengthening our borders, and so on. Si foreign direct investment, hindi naman natin kasi masasabi na sa investor na kailangan sa line na education ka mag-i-invest. Okay, kailangan sa infrastructures ka mag-i-invest. We cannot tell them to do such. Kaya hindi natin mamamanage kung saan dapat nila ilagay yung investment nila. Then investors may have less moral attachment, lalo na sa nature. Hindi ba kapag maggagawa tayo ng mga factories, yung iba doon nagkokos ng pollution. Out of that pollution, nadadamage yung ozone layer, and at the same time, nakaka-apekto ito para sa kalagayan ng isang bansa. Then, we have here unethical access to local markets. Dahil nga, we give them the right or we give them the access para magkaroon ng isang business, halimbawa sa Pilipinas, some of them will do have unethical access to local market or they can manipulate kung ano man ang nangyayari sa kanilang market. Next ay BRICS economies. So BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But take note na ang BRICS ay originally Brazil, Russia, India, and China pa lang.
In 2001, Goldman Sachs predicted that a group of developing and newly industrialized countries could come to dominate Western economies. Since then, those countries have exploded in growth and changed the landscape of world politics. So what are BRICS countries? BRICS is an acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those 5 countries comprise nearly half of the world's population, a quarter of the world's landmass, and a fifth of the world's GDP. Their combined GDP is nearly that of the United States and growing. A major aspect of their alliance is the formation of the new development bank to compete with the IMF and the World Bank. This gives them greater leeway to loan each other and other countries money for development, unrestricted by Western influence. Estimates as to their rate of growth tend to vary. Some say that they'll overtake the G7 economies by 2027. Others suggest they might achieve that goal by 2050. This will largely be fueled by the rapid expansion of the middle class and higher GDP per capita. At the forefront is China. In 2013, they passed the $4 trillion mark in trade and passed the United States to become the largest trade country in the world. China's GDP could rival the US's by 2020, as it is already the second largest economy. India's expansion has led to the prosperity of the middle class in recent years. Part of this is due to the fact that 10 of the 30 fastest growing urban areas are located in India. Brazil, which is oil and iron rich, grew to become the sixth largest economy in the world in 2012, briefly overtaking the United Kingdom. However, Russia has seen economic difficulty and a declining population. Recent sanctions and geopolitical problems increasingly isolated Russia from the rest of the BRICS. The final country, South Africa, was added to the group in 2010, despite having a significantly lower population and economy than any of the others. However, South Africa is the strongest African economy and provides a significant foothold on the continent for China and India. Despite their strong growth, many have said it will be unsustainable as resources are depleted. A growing population will rapidly deplete them and could sabotage the ability to grow at the same pace. Another critique is the overt dominance of China's economy. Without China, the BRICS would have little political clout, and this gives China veto power over BRICS issues. In fact, China's economy alone is larger than the rest of the BRICS combined. Additionally, all 5 countries have mixed records on human rights and ongoing conflicts with their neighboring countries. Regardless, the BRICS have seen significant growth in recent years. Even if they don't become the world's dominant economies, they'll still have far surpassed any expectations of the 20th century. Want to learn about how powerful these countries are on their own? We've covered each of them in these 5 videos. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming stuff we've got coming your way. Thank you for watching.
After knowing what BRICS is, let's now go back to their history. So, si BRICS was introduced by the British economist Jim O'Neill, the chairman of Goldman Sachs Asset Management in 2001. Originally, ang kanilang member country pa lang ay hindi kasama ang South Africa. So they began to have regular meetings in 2006. Presidents of India, Brazil, and China were invited by the leaders of Group 8 nations. By 2009, Russia hosted the first official BRIC meeting with the heads of the state of the 4 countries. In 2010, BRIC became a formal institution and became a formal force for global political and economic transformation. Then by 2011, dun palang naging member si South Africa, kaya siya tinawag na BRICS. These 5 countries were among the fastest growing emerging markets as of 2011. This referred to the idea that China and India will become the world's dominant suppliers of manufactured goods and services, while Brazil and Russia will become similarly dominant as suppliers of raw materials due to lower labor and production costs in these countries, now including a 5th country, South Africa. Many companies have also cited BRIC as a source of foreign expansion opportunity. Si BRICS ay magkakaibang country na meron different qualities, meron different capacities. Si Brazil and Russia, kaya nila mag-supply ng raw materials. Pero mataas ang cost of production sa Brazil and Russia. And at the same time, wala silang mechanism to have manufactured goods and services sa mas mabilis na paraan. So, ang in charge when it comes to the machineries, when it comes to means of production, ay si China and India. At para naman sa human labor, andito ngayon si South Africa. So, as of 2016, ito yung GDP ng BRICS members. 1.80 trillion para sa Brazil, 1.28 trillion para sa Russia, 2.26 trillion para sa India, 11.20 trillion for China, and 294.84 billion para sa South Africa. At yung combination ng kanilang GDP ay 22.26% of the world's GDP. As mentioned in the video, it is 1/5 of the world's GDP. And halos kapantay na nila si US. Apart from that, meron tayong 3 points to remember about BRICS. Una, BRICS is diverse but cooperative. Makikita natin na meron silang different status in terms of economy. China and Russia ang nangungunaw in terms of economy. At nahuhuli naman si South Africa. Pero they were able to work together. How is that possible? Maliban sa pagpo-provide kung ano yung means or kung ano yung meron sa kanilang country, they were able also to match the differences that they have. So they find a common ground in the principles of sovereignty and non-intervention. That's why they unanimously condemned NATO's intervention in Libya for overstepping its humanitarian mandate, and why Brazil, India, and South Africa had rejected Western efforts to isolate and sanction Russia for its annexation of Crimea. Hindi ba si Ukraine ay dating part ng Russia? And si Ukraine naman ay under niya si Crimea. Si Crimea, gusto niyang bumalik as part of Russia. However, hindi ito ang gusto ni Ukraine. So what happened there ay nag-intervene si Russia para mapabalik si Crimea sa kanilang sovereignty. Kaya nagkaroon din ng conflict or ng Cold War ang Ukraine at Russia kasi nagkaroon ng external intervention si Russia kay Ukraine. So once again, diverse but cooperative. They are different politically and economically. Sa political, Brazil, India, and South Africa are liberal democracies, tapos si Russia and China naman ay authoritarian. Pero, they are one when it comes to sovereignty and non-intervention. Next, financial alternatives. BRICS have begun building new multilateral institutions, marking a departure from their informal roots. By the end of 2014, the BRICS will launch the new development bank, a 50 billion lending platform to finance infrastructure projects in the developing world. So the BRICS are also creating 100 billion contingency reserve arrangement to cushion their economies from global financial pressures. So it's no secret that the BRICS launched these initiatives out of frustration with the Bretton Woods institution. Bakit? Ano po ba nangyari sa Bretton Woods? Karoon ng stagflation out of the Bretton Woods system. Then, due to inaction by the US Congress, the International Monetary Fund has failed to implement reforms that would grant developing worlds voting shares matching their economic size. But with IMF reform, nowhere in sight, new BRICS organizations offer an attractive alternative to US-led institutions. So that means na merong sariling plano, may sariling pondo ang BRICS economies. They have contingency plan, they do have contingency reserve arrangement, at meron silang sariling bank na magpapautang para magkaroon ng infrastructure yung mga developing world, which is very ideal when it comes to the world economy. Kasi kahit bumagsak ang IMF, kahit bumagsak ang WTO, kung meron silang sariling fund or meron silang sariling emergency fund, they can still stand on their own once na magkaroon ng financial crisis. Next is that they are inclusive multilateralism. BRICS aren't the only ones seeking to shape the emerging world order. Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, Turkey, and others are eager to play a more prominent role in global governance. When we say global governance, it encompasses the norms, rules, and other principles that govern the world. So China is extending its influence through other channels as well, such as the new Silk Road Initiative and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which have overshadowed the BRICS Bank. Although UN and IMF reform may be stalled, recent years have seen the proliferation of new, more inclusive multilateral arrangements that offer rising powers a seat at the table. So from the Group of 20 to the Nuclear Security Summit process, the BRICS are central members of the international institutions driving global cooperation today. That means that they are moving towards dominating the world in terms of economy and politics. And they are doing it through the new Silk Road. Then next, we have here the General Agreement on Trade and Services. GATS was established same time na established ang GATT. Later, I'll present a video regarding GATS versus GATT. So it's the first multilateral agreement covering trade and services, which was negotiated during the last round of multilateral trade negotiations called the Uruguay Round and came into force in 1995. Therefore, its creation was one of the major achievements of the Uruguay Round of trade negotiation from 1986 to 1993. This was almost half a century after the entry into force of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade of 1947, or the GATS counterpart in merchandise trade. With that, GATS provides a framework of rules governing services and trade. Kung si GATT ay General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, si GATS naman ay ang focus niya ay services trade. And they want to liberalize trade in services and provide a mechanism for resolving disputes between countries in terms of trading. And yun nga, dahil under ng one umbrella si GATS and GATT, they do have similar principles. So we have here the aims or primary goals of GATS. Una, to ensure that all signatories are treated equitably when accessing foreign trades. Yung mga signatories na tinatawag natin dito ay yung mga countries involved in the market for the foreign market. And they want to promote progressive liberalization of trade and services. Therefore, they are into the free trade system.
Hello and welcome to WTO Forum. The financial crisis in 2007 brought strong pressure on governments to improve their financial regulations. While some governments have made progress in this respect, there remains a lack of harmony with respect to global financial regulation. The WTO rules do not cover many elements of financial regulation, but they do provide for market opening up opportunities for foreign financial services providers. Through the General Agreement on Trade and Services, the GATS, the WTO deals with, among other services sectors, banking, brokerage houses, etc. The question is, what is the relationship between the GATS, the General Agreement on Trade and Services, and efforts of governments to improve their overall financial regulation? We're very pleased to have with us today two experts on this matter. Lori Wallach, Director of the Washington-based Public Citizens Global Trade Watch Division, and Hamid Mamdouh, the Director of the World Trade Organization's Services Division. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Lori, let's start with you. Your thoughts on this?
Well, the rules of GATS, the rules of WTO with respect to financial services, were originally written at the period of major deregulation, and as the history of that agreement shows, pushed by the biggest U.S. and European banking and insurance and securities firms. And they reflect the thinking, very much pro-deregulation, of that era. So while the WTO doesn't set financial regulation, it has binding rules that can constrain countries' ability to implement their national domestic regulations. And there are three particularly problematic issues. One is, while liberalization doesn't have to require deregulation, the specific rules in GATS bring together for any financial sector that gets liberalized certain limits on regulation. And perhaps the most problematic now is a ban on bans. So the inability to just ban a risky financial service if way back in the 90s your country agreed to bind it to the WTO rules. A second issue is that particularly developing countries who are concerned about macro-prudential measures, the flow in and out of capital, not destabilizing their host systems, have started, with the blessing of agencies like the International Monetary Fund, to use things like capital controls or other mechanisms to slow down the wash of money in and out. And those rules have problems with respect to several provisions of GATS, which require openness, no limits on cash flows related to the services that you make commitments on, which is a great idea if you're running an international bus company, but is a problem if it's banking or services where inherently big washes of money is part of the service. It can be destabilizing. And then the third problem is there is a rule that allows a country to defend if at WTO a law is challenged. And as we know under the rules, if a law is challenged, a country has to bring it into conformity, change their law, or they face trade sanctions. The problem is the defense that countries theoretically could use to safeguard prudential financial measures is very vague in its wording, and a lot of countries are worried it wouldn't safeguard enough of their laws. So the bottom line question is, do these rules in WTO need to be reviewed and updated in respect of so many countries trying to re-regulate to make sure there's space to do that without bumping into the trade rules, or worse, being chilled from taking the necessary actions to stabilize the global economy.
Hamid, your views.
Well, thank you, Keith. I think we need first to start looking at what is the meaning of liberalization. The WTO rules actually call for liberalization, not deregulation. Now, we have seen over the years, over the 16 years of implementation of the GATS, a number of problems, the solution to which never lied in reviewing GATS commitments. GATS commitments are about introducing competition in the market, which means that financial operators would operate under the same rules. Now, there is nothing in what we have seen in the financial crisis lately that suggested that the root causes of the crisis actually lied in having competition in the market or allowing financial operators to operate on a level playing field. The question is, do we really need to change the rules, as Laurie is suggesting? I have not actually seen any of the WTO members who suggested that the rules need to be changed. We've seen the financial crisis, we've seen the problems, and we've seen the countermeasures taken by governments, and none of the countermeasures actually was hindered by GATS commitments. Now, a little bit of light needs to be shed on what we call the financial prudential carve-out, which is a provision, it's an exception provision in the treaty, which allows regulators in the financial sector in particular to take whatever measures they find necessary for prudential reasons, including even to protect the stability and integrity of the financial system. Now, a lot of measures have been taken over the past 16 years, none of which has been challenged in the WTO. It is interesting to look at what kind of problems we have and what are the root causes for it. And if we're talking about the rules of the WTO, it would be good to start looking at how can we actually establish a causal link, because there's been a long debate. A lot of international organizations who are more specialized in the WTO in the area of financial regulation have actually concluded that WTO commitments and the GATS are not among the root causes for the crisis. So we need to shed some more light on what really caused the crisis. And it all lies in the area of proper regulation. Now, if I may address just one point you made about international cooperation in the field of financial regulation. I think we do need more international cooperation, because you can't actually continue to have a globalization of financial markets while regulation remains strictly domestic. There needs to be more cooperation in that area. The WTO is not the place to do that, but there are other organizations that are spending more time and resources on that.
Laurie, can I just pick up on something Hamid said about this prudential carve-out? Do you think that this so-called prudential carve-out clause is adequate for giving governments the scope they need to regulate their financial sector?
No, because it's very vague as compared to the rules of the WTO with respect to how you liberalize services are very specific in limiting regulation. When I look at the causes of the crisis, I think there's fairly strong consensus that it was over-deregulation, just out-of-control conduct. And if you look at the rules of the WTO, they reflect that era of deregulation. I'm not saying it was the WTO's idea. They reflect the consensus of the time. And so the rules that I think need to be reviewed and updated, and some member countries do, I would send folks to look at the WTO's website to Barbados's paper on these issues, which lays out specifically the conflicts, problems, and some needed amendments. In that situation, you've got very specific rules, for instance, banning bans of risky services, or saying you can't have capital controls. The prudential measure isn't a carve-out. There were, having looked at the negotiating history, some proposals by Asian countries to actually have a carve-out that would let countries say up front, this is prudential, you mustn't challenge it. Now we have a defense. So, for instance, as countries are starting to re-regulate, because it's the case, there haven't been challenges, but it's because it's been such a deregulated environment. Now that countries are starting to re-regulate, you're starting to see sparring. And there's a lot of uncertainty about whether that prudential measure, the defense, which you normally could raise to say, all right, I am breaking the rules, but I have this excuse, It's unclear if it works because the second sentence of the measure maybe cancels out the first sentence, which is a lovely one. There were discussions when the WTO was being negotiated about both having a stronger defense. There were 5 different proposals. The least robust one was adopted, or literally having a carve-out. Some countries, like Japan, Korea, have scheduled, listed specifically their own prudential cross-cutting exception because they're worried it doesn't work. And so as we look forward to how countries can have the space to re-regulate, some of the issues that have come up, for instance, you have the European Commission's own staff speculating that the European commitments under the old GATS rules might conflict with the financial transaction tax that some countries have talked about putting in place to avoid
Tobin
speculation.
tax.
The Tobin tax. You have a variety of articles, press, scholars going after the European Union, or actually Germany's they're doing short selling ban and the US flash trading ban. Those are bans in sectors we've committed. You have various countries starting to talk to each other. There's a European Commission request to Chile to remove a particular capital flows control mechanism. And so as countries are re-regulating, thank God there hasn't been a formal challenge yet, but there's certainly starting to be a chilling effect. There's a South Africa case where a ban in derivatives has basically not gone into effect because the South African government said, if we do this, we're going to have a trade challenge and have many millions of dollars in sanctions against our exports of goods. We're sorry, but that's our old commitment. These issues are now starting to arise.
Are we seeing rising tensions, Hamid, among the members on this point?
I don't see actually those rising tensions at all, because what we're seeing actually over the past couple of years in particular, in the wake of the crisis, is governments coming to the Financial Services Committee and the WTO and exchanging views on what happened and trying to understand really how that would interface with their commitments under the WTO. And the conclusion consistently, and Laurie referred to the submission by Barbados, which was a very interesting submission. Basically what they're saying is the WTO and the GATS does not restrict governments' ability to regulate in any way they want. The point about the Barbados paper actually is that it was saying, you see, we will have to invoke the prudential carve-out. And that would mean that we would need to deviate from our commitments. But this is precisely why the prudential carve-out is there. It's to allow governments to do things that, on the face of it, their commitments might not allow them. Now, if you look at the commitments and particularly at the products, the financial products that are approved by different jurisdictions, you won't see that the GATS commitments actually restrict the ability of countries to allow certain products or disallow them. From a risk management point of view, just look at the situation of Canada and the United States. The two financial markets are comparably liberal. One is more deregulated than the other, which is obviously the United States. Why didn't we see the kind of contamination in the financial system in Canada similar to what we have seen in the United States? The cause for it is pretty clear. The deregulatory approach that Laurie referred to at a certain era led the United States to go in a certain direction, while the Canadian financial system actually did not share the same view, did not apply the same regulatory approach. GATS commitments are very comparable. So where is the difference? What are the root causes here?
Laurie Wallach, your final thoughts.
Well, the Canadian-US situation is a perfect example, I think, of the opposite point, which is Canada, in looking at the GATS rules, realized it conflicted with what are some very strict regulations. The irony is the OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, typically slams Canada as being not open, not liberalized, because they have a rule that requires domestic ownership up to a certain percentage of banks. So as a result, actually, they have a handful of banks, they're mainly national, and they're very strictly regulated, and they had to take an exception in the WTO because of the underlying rules to be able to maintain that. So back to the Barbados' paper. The paper actually lays out 5 amendments to the GATS. The paper doesn't say the current exceptions are okay. They say the time has arrived after things have settled down to review and repair, to update, to bring the WTO up to where the consensus for regulation is. And those 5 amendments, hitting a lot of the issues I described, I think are a major step towards what needs to happen to ensure that the WTO is not an obstacle to financial stability going forward.
Hamid Mamdouh, you have the last word.
I think the Barbados paper didn't go very far, particularly because it doesn't change much in the current situation. The amendments that you're referring to were actually discussed in a very, very theoretical and academic way, but none of the recipients of the paper, including a lot of developing countries, particularly those who were actually in the forefront of bringing the question of understanding what happened to the table in the Committee on Financial Services, like Peru, like South Africa, did not actually support those amendments. I think we need to put things in the proper perspective. I don't see where that paper is now. It was a very useful contribution to the debate, but it wasn't actually put into action because there wasn't seen any need to do that.
Hamid Mamdouh, Laurie Wallach, many thanks to you both, and thanks to you for watching WTO Forum.